Vayaki Tavo el haaretz, asher Hashem Elokecha noten lecha nachala, v'yishta v'yashavta ba. And when you come to the land which God has promised as an inheritance, which is quite important, which means Sefer Devarim in this and in many examples just now told you that it's fully cognizant of Sefer Bereshit when the land was the topic and the land was promised to the patriarchs. And you're going to receive the land as a nachala, as an inheritance. V'yarashta, you will inherit it. V'yashavta, and you will settle in it. So I'm just saying, right there, half a sentence, acknowledgement of Parsha after Parsha in Sefer Bereshit. Lech lecha v'yerech ha'isara tolda. I'm saying it's all there in that one little concentrated half of a verse. V'lakachta me'reshit kol pri adama. Now, right here, you can decide how much you want to go back to your Bereshit theme in terms of me'reshit from the beginning. And for that matter, if you want to channel your inner Hasidic Rebbe outlook of Torah, then it becomes very interesting that in the beginning of Bereshit, we kind of messed up with the first fruit, and now we have a mitzvah with the first fruit. So it's almost like you can't help but recognizing that there's some kind of a tikkun, fixing, which is taking place over here. So again, that's really interesting that this is the first mitzvah. But I want to say something which is a little bit broader. As we're going to continue over here in the Parsha, first of all, we're going to have this whole larger tochacha which is taking place. So what exactly is the tocha and how does it relate to everything else over here? So hold that for a second, because that is quite important. The other thing that we're going to have over here is essentially, in this first part, Perek Kavav, you're going to have two mitzvot. One is going to be Bikurim. The second one's going to be Vidui Ma'aser. And then we're going to get into this, some kind of an interesting declaration. Hayom hazeh Hashem Elokecha mitzavcha la'asot et hachukim ha'ela v'mishratim v'shamarta v'asita otam b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha. You're going to have this statement about the mitzvot, accepting the mitzvot, and we're going to see some of the comments about that. In the middle, right, when we get to the Bikurim, we're going to have something which we are, again, this goes back to context. We are far more familiar with it out of context than we are in context. What do I mean by that? If you were to ask the average, kid who had a Jewish education, what exactly is the Aramid Avid Avi, and what is its significance, and when is it said? So you know that 9 out of 10, if not 99 out of 100, are going to tell you, oh, that's a part of the Pesach Seder, and we say that on Pesach, which is obviously the wrong answer. I mean, it's the right answer of why they're familiar with it, it's the right answer of when we say it, but it's not what it is. And the fact that we use it on Pesach is really interesting, because what is that? That's the text that we're supposed to say when we take those first fruits and we go up. Actually, which holiday is it? It's the holiday of Shavuot and not the holiday of Pesach. The fact that this was chosen as a text which was said, by the way, it's incredibly imprecise what I'm saying now, because all you need to do is to look in the Mishnah and you'll realize that what I'm saying is wrong, because the Mishnah doesn't say that you say the text, that you koreh the text, you read the text of Aramid Avid Avi. It says that you're doresh, you say the drashot, which is what the main part of the Haggadah is. The Haggadah is not Aramid Avi. It is what Chazal saw within that, and it's the teachings that Chazal said, which means here was a really good, succinct place that not you're going to say a formal text. You know, a formal text would be, Shema Yisrael, Shem Elokeinu, Shem Echad. That's not what this is. That's not what we do on Pesach. What we do on Pesach is we say all of the drashot. If Rav Soloveitchik were here, he would say that on Pesach we're involved in Torah Sheba'al Peh, as opposed to Torah Shebichtav. What we're doing is we're learning what it says, not just technically reading something. On the other hand, on when one fulfills the mitzvah of the Bikurim, you go up to Jerusalem and you say a formal text. Then you're not saying the Torah Sheba'al Peh, then you're saying the Torah Shebichtav. That, therefore, should be interesting, the difference that you're koreh. I mean, just real easy homework. Read through the Mishnayot, Masechet Bikurim. Right? Just read it. Learn those. Only a couple chapters. Learn. Okay, you're not going to do it now. Then do it on Chag Shavuot. You have nothing to do. Then a couple chapters. Read Masechet Bikurim. again, it's a pet peeve, but I love when people give Divrei Torah that Chag Shavuot has no mitzvot. Yeah, no mitzvot. You know how many people I've heard give this Divrei Torah? It's all about Torah. It's all about Torah. And by the way, I want to, and cheesecake. I want to address that for a second because that's actually really important. I'm still no, cheesecake is not as important. Again, if my wife were here, it would be, but it's not that important. Yeah, I have to be careful. Again, context is important. When we think about what we call the Arba Lashonot Shel Gula, right? V'lakachti, v'galti, and so on. So we all know that there's a fifth one as well. And what's the fifth one? The fifth one is Veheveti. Again, that's for the Zionist crazies, right? Veheveti, I'll bring you to the land. By the way, think for a second. Veheveti ki Tavo. You realize now that there is this connection. What we're going to have a little bit later on, as I said, I already read those verses and people don't know what to do with it. And when we're going to get to Rashi and some of the others, you're going to suddenly have this realization. I'm making this real easy for you now. You can have this realization that if we're talking about the mitzvah of Bikurim, it means that we're talking about Chag HaShavuot. Chag HaShavuot in the Torah, right? Listen to my words carefully. I'm back to Torah Shebichtav. In the Chag HaShavuot in the Torah is an agricultural holiday. Shavuot, the 7 weeks. It's all agricultural. Torah Sheba'al Peh is going to reveal to us, that also happens to be the day that we received the Torah at Sinai. So now how surprising should it be that we're here talking about Parshat Bikurim, and then there's going to be a reference to receiving and accepting the Torah? I'm just saying, once you realize this, it becomes completely obvious that of course we're talking about Matan Torah in the context of Chag HaBikurim. On what I just now told you, which I'm saying is pshat, this simple level of this understanding of uniting the Torah Shebachtav and the Torah Sheba'al Peh, or even better, how those who were the masters of Torah Sheba'al Peh were teaching us these ideas. They saw what I'm saying right now as obvious. The only thing I'll have to admit to you is that at least as of this moment, I didn't find anybody who said what I just now said. But it's obvious. Now you all know that it's staring at you. It's almost, you can't avoid what I just now said, that of course in the context of Chag HaBikurim, there's going to be some kind of expression of that other side that we, again, generally know about from Torah Sheba'al Peh, but it's staring at us, and that is Matan Torah. Can I go one step further? And this I'm not going to get back to today. But the idea of a tochacha, of a rebuke, essentially is the fine print in the contract, whereby that if you break the rules of the contract, you're going to lose your rights to stay in that particular place. Which means that the flip side of Matan Torah is going to be, and these are the rules, and this is what's going to happen, and therefore you don't keep it, this is what's going to follow. So therefore, of course, the Midrashei Halacha, and later on a whole bunch of commentaries are going to point out, yes, the last part of Vayikra, leading into the Vayikra Tochacha, is going to start out with Bahar Sinai. Because this goes back to what happened at Sinai, because the other part of accepting the Torah is not just, this is what you do, here are the consequences if you don't do it. Now, you have the bigger picture of what I just now, again, I'm trying to lead the witness, as it were, to understand context so that we can get to Pshat. So now I want to say another thing. When we look at the two mitzvah that we have over here, and that is, again, the Bikurim and the Vidui Maser, there's something about the two of them that is easier for us to understand, and then there's something about them which makes them somewhat of an outlier. Again, I'm being careful now, somewhat of an outlier. Which means the idea that we're obligated to bring an offering, or some kind of offering, or some kind of gift, or some kind of gesture, man reaching out to God, that makes sense. What's interesting in both of these cases is that there's also a verbal declaration. Again, going all the way back to Bereshit, if you will, and God infuses within man the Ruach Melalala, this ability to speak. What makes us special in terms of creation is our ability take letters and turn them to words, and words and turn them into sentences, and sentences and turn them into really meaningful concepts. So over here, other than the physical gesture that we are being asked to do, we're also being asked to speak and to say something. Now, the saying of what we say, that's also interesting, which means what the choice is over here, how, again, that's going to be the details, but the very fact that we're speaking is interesting. What we say is obviously going to be extremely interesting, but I think that's important for the context. The other thing that I'm going to point out, and now we're going to start reading, the other thing I'm going to point out is something also that you would really easily take for granted, but that is going to be the combination of various expressions of time. Past, present, future. Again, if you want to think about the difference between humans and animals, so one ability is our ability to speak. The other ability is for us to be haunted by the past and for us to have fear for the future. Think about how much of what is created lives in a present. Doesn't really, right? I don't know how many dogs lay in bed at night and can't sleep and worry about paying the mortgage, right? I don't think that's going to happen. Or wondering, okay, what are my children doing right now? Or right? Again, this whole sense of worry that we have, the angst that we have, this torture. Next time you're being tortured, realize that that is part of this gift that God gave us for us to be able to be impacted by time. And yes, sometimes there's something really negative. Again, depression is that we allow things, real or imagined, that happened in the past to cause us not to believe in the future and to be stuck in a present that we're convinced is not going to be better than anything, again, real or imagined from the past. So therefore, it's taking these various aspects of time and kind of convincing us that we don't control time. Now, also think, because again, there is this link between leaving Egypt and standing at Sinai. See, now I can't even say anything about this. It's terrible torture. It's this, again, to get up to Chag HaBikurim, we first had to start with Egypt, and Egypt, how much of it is about time and rushing and trying to make sure that the whole thing is not missed and turns into chametz. Let's start reading. V'yot Tavo la'aretz, future. Tavo, when something's going to happen in the future. Asher Hashem lokech noten lecha nachala v'yishtav yishavtava v'lakachta meirishit kol pri adama. You're going to take from the first fruits, which by the way is also, it's interesting because you can do with that in terms of time, whatever it is that you choose. Asher tavimi artzecha, asher Hashem lokech noten lecha v'samta betena v'halachta el makom asher yivchar Hashem lokecha l'shaken shemo sham. So we just now had two expressions of holiness. One expression is when God's going to take you to the Holy Land. Second one is this anticipation of having the Beit HaMikdash as well. So over here, again, if you kind of miss over the expressions of holiness right now, then you've also kind of missed what is being expressed. Again, this anticipation of the future, the Kohanim which will be in the future. V'amarta elav, and say to him, Higadati hayom la'Hashem Elokecha, Kivati ela aretz asher nishba Hashem Elokecha lavoteinu l'teit lanu. So in the future, you're going to talk about the past, about entering into the land. V'lokacha netanem yadecha v'nicha lefnei mizbach Hashem Elokecha v'anita v'amarta, and again, not just the action that you give over the fruits, you speak and you articulate, you say. V'amarta lefnei Hashem Elokecha, Arami aved avi v'yered Mitzrayim v'yagash sham b'mitei merav v'yisham l'goy gadol etzum v'rav, and you give context. By the way, part of the reason of giving context is, and this is going to be obvious from this section, part of giving context is in order to get us to a point of celebration, which means when we realize the humble origins, we realize where we came from, we realize how we got to where we are today, so then you can pause and think, wow, that really was something which is incredible. And this is a larger historical context, but again, you're going to go in the future, and then you're going to think about the past. I mean, again, that's just really interesting, that this ability of being able to deal with time in this way. And you were Mitei ma'at, a small in number. Yisham l'goy gadol, tzum barav, you became great in number. V'netzak al Hashem, again, you use the voices to be able to scream out to God. I'm skipping, as you see. V'yavel makom hazeh, and God brought us to this place. V'la'aretz hazot, et ha'aretz hazot, eretz zavad chalav v'dvash. V'tahine veti et reish pri adama, asher natati li Hashem. And now I'm taking this, which God gave me, which is, again, God acknowledgement, realizing I am not alone in this world, realizing that God has done something for me. And then it says in Pasuk Yud Aleph, V'samachta b'chol hatov. I love this. What does it say? Be happy, right? Be happy. Just be happy. V'samachta b'chol hatov asher natan lecha Hashem Elokecha uleveitecha ata v'levi v'ager asher b'kirbecha. Which is also really interesting because it just now got a little bit broader. It's you and your home and the Levi and the Ger, which means there is this whole larger community that you are now a part of. Again, no isolation, larger community, going down with others, feeling the sense of community, connecting to the past, believing in the future. Again, there's just so much here, but that's why I'm really stressing is that there is this larger conversation. And then it goes on to this second law, Ki tachlel aseret kol maaser tvotcha b'shana shlishit, shnat ha'maaser, natat levi, lager letom la'almana. Again, built into our agricultural laws are going to be civic responsibility to taking care of the have-nots. And v'achlu b'shorech v'savehu, they should be sated. V'amarti l'fnei Hashem, again, second time, if we needed the connection. Both of these laws are agricultural laws. Both of these laws are agricultural laws with declarations, with speaking. Right? I did as you commanded. I didn't break, I didn't forget, which is also, forgetting is obligations from the past in the present. So a person's going to say, I did this, not do this out of, in a sense of mourning or sense of tum'ah. Shamati b'kol Hashem Elokai asiti chol asher tzitzi. That's the declaration. That's the vidur, as it were. I did what God commanded me to do. Hashkif imon kadshecha min hashamayim uvarechet amcha Yisrael ve'et adamar shenatata lanu kasher nishbata lavoteinu eretz zavad chalav u'dvash. And now I call up to God, please bless the people, please bless us, cause divine abundance to come down. Again, all of this is interesting. And then, again, all of this for me was an introduction to the next couple of verses. Hayom hazeh Hashem Elokecha mitzavcha lasot et hachukim ha'ela. On this day, God commanded you to perform these chukim. Now, you want to call it statutes, that's fine with me. To perform these statutes. Now, what's going to be the argument among the various commentaries in terms of what is pshat? What does ha'ela mean? How broadly do I understand ha'ela? Do I need to explain this to you? Is ha'ela all 613 commandments? Is ha'ela everything that was taught in Devarim? Is ha'ela what was just now said in the last couple of verses? What is ha'ela? So I'm going to say it again. What's pshat? A contextual context, right? A contextual understanding. What's the contextual understanding? So people don't necessarily agree in what is the context. So I'm saying right there, you now will understand. Again, we can look through the various Rishonim, but I think you now understand that they're going to go in every single direction because they're not necessarily going to understand whatever the context is in the precisely the same way. By the way, if you're going to say it's a narrow interpretation just of this section, then you'll have to understand, so what is the chok over here and what is the mishpat over here? And there obviously will be commentaries will explain that. Et Hashem he'emarta hayom. Now what this word he'emarta means, give me a couple seconds. Liot l'cha l'elokim v'lechet b'drachav v'lishmor chokav v'mitzvotav u'mishpatav u'lishmor b'kolo. V'Hashem he'emircha hayom liot lo la'am skula kasher diber lach u'lishmor kol mitzvotav u'letatcha elyon al kol hagayim asher sa le'tila l'shem l'tefaret. Also, just note the word tefaret or teferet over here because it's somehow going to creep into all of this. Now, some of this should remind you of Matan Torah, right? Back Shmot, Perek Yutet, chapter 19, preparations for Har Sinai, right? We're going to receive the Torah, and you're going to be in Am Skula, you're going to be Memlechet Kohanim V'Gai Kadosh. So it is interesting, a lot of this is right here. And do we have enough information now? I'll just point out, in case we missed it, in source number 2, which is right after this, we then get Vayitzav Moshe Zevnei Yisrael Ta'am Lemor Shmor Kol HaMitzvah Asher Anochi Mitzavchetchem Hayom, again commanding today Vayam B'Yom Asher Ta'avru Et HaYarden, and then it's going to talk about setting up the stones and going up to Har Grizim Harival. And there is also an expression in Pasuk Zayin, V'samachta Lefnei Hashem Elkecha. It goes back to this point of joy. Joy, as far as I recall, is written 3 different times in these sources here. Okay? So therefore it does stress. Later on in the Tochacha, when it says, all these things happen to you, Tachat Asher Lo Avadat Hashem Elkecha, B'simcha V'tov Levav Mirov Kol, realize that also is going to be part of this larger issue. Good. Rashi. Source 3. Hayom Hazeh. So where's Rashi going on? On Pasuk Ted Zayin, right? What did Ted Zayin say? Hayom hazeh Hashem l'kech mitzavcha. So what is Hayom hazeh? Rashi writes, B'chol yom yu beinecha chadashim ki'ilu bo bayom nitztaveta eleihem. So Rashi gives a great teaching, but notice how he totally kind of left Devarim. He left where we are, right over here, what's happening on this day with Moshe and Klal Yisrael, and he's saying, we always need to see, today I'm commanding you the Torah. What does he say? We always need to see, every day we need to see, as if the Torah was given that day. Now some of you recall there's a Mishnah like this as well, there's other teachings like this as well. Now this is, on the one hand, wonderful, but on the other hand, you notice, you could have said this at any given time, because any given day you need to see, which means there's nothing special about this. Rather, he's saying, you need to, meaning, in a sense, what Rashi's doing is he's not explaining why it's here, he's explaining it could be anywhere, because every day you need to see as if the Torah is being given. Vishamarta vasita motam, and you need to guard them and to do it, and so far. And he says, Bat kol mivarachto, and then a voice comes out from heaven and blesses, Hevetu b'kiruim hayom tiskel l'shana haba. So now you realize in this next comment, Rashi does the opposite. He takes it back and connects it to the Bikurim. But he also says something which we're going to explain a lot as we proceed. And that is, he says that man does something, and then there will be a divine response. That's really important, because how many times do we do something, but we don't necessarily sense or feel in an intimate way the divine response? We hope that that's the case. We pray that that's the case. But Rashi's saying over here is that over here, when we do the Bikurim, and notice what just now happened. Bikurim just now got connected to accepting the Torah. Okay, meaning that's exactly the point that I was saying. Did Rashi say this clearly? Absolutely not. Do you now understand this? I hope. I hope. Excuse me? I don't think that's necessarily the case. I understand, but I don't think that's necessarily the case, especially over here in this section. But there's going to be this trying to respond, saying, Tiskel l'shana haba. Hopefully you'll be able to do this again next year as well, and that's also great. Especially when you keep in mind of all the tochacha coming, if you mess up, then this and this and this is going to happen. Ve'az lo tiskel l'shana haba. So, chas v'shalom. The Netziv in source number 4 is going to go even further, and I have to remind you something about the Netziv. The Netziv, Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Rashiva of Volozhin, his commentary on the Torah is the classes that he gave in the yeshiva. By the way, not every Rosh Yeshiva would teach Chumash. He taught Chumash. So you always have to keep in mind when somebody is giving a lecture who the audience may be, and then what's the point of it. So the Netziv does this a number of times. He goes, again, I'm reading into it, but he goes into full Rosh Yeshiva mode, and over here he's talking about the importance of learning Torah, which should not be a surprise, but he also did what Rashi does, but again, Rashi may have backed away from it. He goes even stronger in the sense, essentially ignoring the context. Remember I told you, Pshat is going to be the context, but what's the context? So he says over here, Yadata Hadrash Shevi Rashi. So the first thing that he does is that he, quote unquote, disses Rashi by saying, yeah, Rashi gave a drash over here. So you would expect, again, what's the opposite of drash is going to be, okay, I'm going to tell you the Pshat. Right? Shevi Rashi, B'chol Yom Yebenecha Kechadashim. So right there, if it sounded like I was, kind of maybe claiming that wasn't exactly pshat, so now you have the Netziv saying it black and white. Yeah, the drash that he gave. That's like the biggest, pushing it down. And what can you do? We need to know pshat. You can't take something outside of its pshat. It talks about, again, that day. And this is in contrast to Sinai, which means there's something new here. Vinyan Parsha, what is really the special concept of what's taking place in this Parsha? Hu hakdama ubiur likritat brit sheba acharav habrachot v'klalot shenikra brit shebarvot moav. So, okay, this is all very fair what he's saying, that this is really an introduction to this new covenant which will take place at the end of the 40 years. So he's saying, no, this is not the same thing as Sinai. It is not what Rashi is saying. This is moving forward. It's this new Brit. And there's one really important component. And what is it? What we were warned right now, how we were told that we need to be machadesh, to come up to new things as we're learning Torah, to make applications of Torah, to make it relevant. All that's great, but I don't know how he got any of that from these psukim. And he goes on in this for a while. Talmud sheli made Moshe, v'hainadita besota, gabi brachu l'klalot, l'shmor l'sot, l'sotu, l'chadesh. So essentially saying, no, this is all about how we learn Torah. That was the Netziv, again, source 4 in Pasuk Tet Zayin, continuing Pasuk Yud Zayin, et Hashem hamarta, Targum onkelos chatavta. And we'll get to that. We'll get back to the Targum soon. והוא לשון הגמרא, נחזור לעניין הפרשה, שבזה הברית שנקראת על שקדת בעיון התורה, נתחברת את השם כלשון הזוהר הקדוש, דאורייתא וקדוש ברוך הוא, וקודשא בריך הוא בישראל חד. By the way, even though he quotes the Zohar as saying this, everybody quotes the Zohar as saying this, whether the Zohar actually said this or not is another discussion. There was a wonderful whole collection of books written by somebody who identified himself as Shmuel Ze'ira. Those of you who know who he is, probably the greatest bibliograph of the generation. Lived in a little apartment in Mea Sharm, and on all kinds of phrases and terms like that everybody quotes, he goes back and shows, well, who was the first one and who quotes it this way, and does it actually say that? So I'm 99% sure in this case, he pointed this out as well, that it's not exactly like that. I'm going to kind of pause on this, but what the Netziv is doing over here is he's moving over completely in terms of this is all about learning Torah. It's all about connecting to God by Torah. And essentially what he did is he took it out of the context that we had seen. And what's the context? The land, most importantly the land, the Bikurim. That's really good, what Jerry said. It's like, how do you start with Tavo? How do you continue with the Tochacha? How do you continue, again, I did this out of sequence, with going into the land and the Brachot HaKlalot and so on and so forth, and then just kind of ignore Israel, and you can now be saying this drasha in your yeshiva in Volozhin and say, you know what this is really all about? This is all about learning Torah. So I'm saying this is great, and the best part of it is, and he said, oh, look at Rashi. Rashi tried to say Pshat here, and Rashi is not Pshat. I'm going to tell you what Pshat is. So again, I'll just leave that. I'll leave that to you. The Ramban in source number 5 says Hayom Hazeh, again back to that same verse. Hinei hishlim Moshe laveret Torah ulechadesh kol mitzvot shetzivah oto Hashem lechadesh lahem. Lekach amar Hayom Hazeh Hashem lekach mitzavcha. What is he saying? That the job that Moshe had in Sefer Devarim of repeating and teaching the Torah has now come to its completion. This was the final laws, and that's why after these 2 laws, by the way, you notice something also, then these 2 laws are not important or special, they just happen to be the last 2. And really what's taking place, why is there this Matan Torah type of a statement? Again, what did Rashi do? Because every day is like Matan Torah. What did the Netziv do? No, the whole thing here is about learning Torah, moving forward, and about being Mechadesh. What does the Ramban say? That now we're completing Moshe's task in terms of teaching over the Torah. The Chatam Sofer, in source number 6, Shogin Chazar Kadosh Baruch Hu Kol Torah Barvot Morav Mishum She'az Nasu B'nei Arba'im V'amdu Al Dat Rabban. He quotes this great teaching. This, by the way, was back to us being here for 40 years. He says that Moshe, now at the end of 40 years, reteaches something. There's a great passage in the Gemara that says that it will take a student 40 years to understand their teacher. It says, when you're young, you think you got it, and then he goes, now, is this connected that to 40, you get to Bina, you get to understanding, so it says that now we've completed the 40 years of Moshe teaching OUisrael, that now they're finally getting it. So, well, some of them may have been quite young. I don't know if there's a complete replacement of the population, but especially think about somebody who may have been 15 years old when they leave Egypt, and now 40 years later, now they're 55, and now say, okay, now they begin to understand what Moshe had been teaching. So as I said, I couldn't skip over that. V'chiskuni et chukim ha'ele shel bikurim v'shel ma'aser. So now remember from the beginning I told you, context. So therefore, what is context? So that's what everyone's disagreeing with. What is the context? Is this context the entire Torah? Is this context the Sefer Dvarim? Is this context Parshat Tavo? Which means, what is context? Once I know context, now I know what Pshat is, and nobody agrees what the context is, which is why they don't agree what the Pshat is. I hope that's really clear and really simple, because I think sometimes people kind of just get lost. Oh, he said this, and he said, you're not understanding where they're coming from. They're all trying to do the same thing. And finally, the Kiskuni ends up saying, "V'shamarta b'levavcha v'asita otam ba'aretz." Noticing, what do these two laws have in common? Ki tavo la'aretz. These are agricultural laws, entering into the land. That this is part of this new. Meaning, it's not just randomly. Oh, now Moshe completed all the laws. It's not just no. This is ki tavo, and that's why it's so important. The Orach Chaim, in source number 8, goes in the same kind of direction. Also, he says, "V'nira shekavanat hakatuv hi al zeh derech lefi shekol Torah tziva ota Hashem b'Har Sinai." Everyone's commanded Sinai, and then he goes on, "Elo lachazman beParshat zot bikurim masot she'enu nogim ela ba'aretz v'tziva Hashem otam hagam shelo yazmanam mitam k'dei lomod otam l'kabel scharet l'kabatam." Which means previously these laws, which are agriculturally based, perhaps were studied in the desert, but they weren't practiced. Which means what we're being told now by Moshe is now we're moving from study, preparation, to implementation. All this is getting real now. So I'm going to say it again, that context makes a big difference. The Sforno, and my strong suspicion here, I don't know if we'll come back and when, not today. The Sforno has here in his mind, I'm sorry, I'm reading the Sforno's mind. He has over here in his mind some issues that go back to the beginning of Bereshit, including the lack of clarity that takes place when one eats from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And what's between the lines over here, you have to trust me on all of this, what's between the lines over here is he's actually dealing with the first couple of chapters of the Moreh Nevuchim, of the Guide for the Perplexed. And essentially what happens, how man is changed when they sin with eating from the tree, and what eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil does in order to cause confusion. So over here he writes, Hayom hazeh she'atem nichnas imo labrit. So interesting again, what is the context that he's looking at, that there's about to be a covenant? And we're about to, again, make a brit. See, the Brit then helps you with everything, including the Tochacha, because that again, I'm going to say is the fine print. What does it mean here? B'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha, right? V'chol nafshecha. Now, again, all of you, if I would have just asked you out of context, What do those words remind you of? What would you have told me? You would have said Shema and Vahaya, so pay attention to that. B'chol levavcha shetakir b'li shum safek sh'ur lasot ritzono. B'chol levavcha means that you understand without any doubts that this is what you need to do to serve God. So that's what I'm going to say it again. That's really interesting because following the bikurim, the first fruits, which are there to do a tikkun of the first fruits, and the first fruits cause confusion between good and evil. What happens when you eat from a tree of knowledge of good and evil? It causes confusion. Look what this foreigner was saying over here. And now, hopefully, when you perform this mitzvah in the land of Israel, right, being the land, it causes one to be wise. It's going to cause clarity. That's really important. Clarity is going to result. That you're not going to have any confusion that's going to cause you to do things or to have ta'ava. Again, go back to Bereshit, go back to the tree. That's what I'm saying. It's all here between the lines, but you have to compare this to what he writes back there in Bereshit. But it is interesting because it seems to be that Ramban is saying, again, I'm definitely going way overboard over here, that back in Bereshit, we were in the holy place in the Garden of Eden. We ate from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, which causes confusion, and then we go off into exile. And now fast forward to the end of the book of Devarim, we had just spent some time in exile, and now we're about to enter into a holy place again. So hopefully keeping this mitzvah Bikurim and entering into this land is going to create a situation of clarity. I'm just saying that is just so interesting, but that is really what's emerging from these words of the Sforno. But again, I'm not convinced if you just read this by itself you would know, but if you went back and, I'm being serious now, go back and read the Sforno in chapter 2 and chapter 3 of Bereshit, then you'll see exactly what I'm saying, because this is a theme which is there. We'll see as we continue. The Baal HaTurim in source number 10, B'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha. So v'samachle et Hashem ha'amarta the b'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha hainu kriyat shema tichtiv be. So what did he do for you? He did exactly what you would have done by yourselves. And what's that? Free association. What does this remind you of? Shema. So now pay attention. So we have Shema staring at us between the lines. It's also going to be important. And and that's what it means. And he is going to be telling you now that there's a Gemara in Brachot that you need to pay attention to. He's not going to be the only one telling you this. It just happens to be that today, when we're learning together, he's the first one to tell you this. Come on, reality is we all should remember this Gemara, and we're going to have to get into the Gemara. Atem asituni chativa echad ba'aretz. Now that should remind you of something because the Targum already took us there. Hainu kriyat shema. Et Hashem emarta b'gematria zu kriyat shema. So now, again, this is typical Baal HaTurim. What did he do? There's a thematic understanding. What is the theme over here? There's something about Shema. By the way, what is Shema? Break it down, conceptualize. What is Shema? Shema is Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim. Soon we're going to have Rosh Hashanah, right? We're going to have all the psukim of Malchiot. What's going to be and each one of those psukim are going to say, right, Melech, in some sense. What's the final pasuk of Malchiot? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Because what is Shema? Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shemayim. It's accepting God as King. So over here, he's telling you, pay attention, because that Shema issue is really here, and there's something over here about Kriyat Shema, but I'm going to again insist, note that there's a little bit more than we understand. In source 11, the Kli Yakar, he's going again to this thing. And remember that Rashi that talked about you're going to do something and then God is going to respond. You're going to make your pronouncements over here, and then he says, and then God's going to respond and going to say that you're an Am Skula and so on. Again, this duality, and if you read more about this, you'll get it. Source 12 is the Targum Onkelos, which I already hinted at twice. The pasuk is pasuk Yud Zayin. So if I go back to Yud Zayin, it says Et Hashem he'emarta. Now I told you before, I didn't translate the word he'emarta. So what does he'emarta mean? That itself could have been the only thing that we discussed today. What is He'emarta? Rashi is going to tell you that He'emarta, let's see, do I have Rashi over here? Yeah, that this, let's see if I wrote it down or not, that Rashi is going to tell you that this is actually what a hapex legomenon, but it's not really. It's a word which is used only one time in an entire text. So look at Rashi for a second in 13. He'emarta ve'emircha, ein lehem eid mochiach b'mikra. There's no other source where these are. By the way, it's two of them. That's why it's not one. It's He'emarta. So what he's telling you is, again, if you look at pasuk Tet Zayin, Hayom hazeh Hashem elokech matzavcha lasot l'chim eile. Sorry, pasuk Yud Zayin, Et Hashem He'emarta Hayom. And I said, I don't know what that means. And then pasuk Yichet, V'Hashem He'emircha Hayom. So you remember before I said that it was an action in the divine response? It was right over, it really was right here. It wasn't that I needed to look at a commentary to say it. It was staring at us. But we don't know what that word means yet. And Rashi already told us that it does, there's no other examples of this. And then Rashi will bring other examples of this, just to drive you crazy. So Rashi writes, Ein lam eid muchiach b'mikra. V'li, but nonetheless, it seems to me, Lashon hafrasha v'havdalah. It's language somehow of separation. Hivdalta l'cha me'elohei hanechar. Then Am Yisrael, by doing what they're doing here, has separated themselves from idolatrous foreign gods, liot l'cha le'elokim, in order to accept you as God. V'hu hifrishecha elav me'amei haaretz, and God then has separated you from the nations of the world, liot lo la'am skula, in order to be a special nation. Umatzati lahem eid, and Rashi, after saying that there's no other context, he says, v'hu lashon tiferet. By the way, that itself is interesting because it's similar to the word tiferet. Remember I noted that tiferet was here and I told you pay attention to tiferet? You got it? You got tiferet? You realize we're looking for tiferet now? Tiferet means glory. Kamo yitamru kol pa'alei avin. They glorify or boast themselves all the wrongdoers. So Rashi quotes that pasuk in Tehillim. Yitamru means to glory. Glory is tiferet. Tiferet is pe'er. Pe'er means to glorify. So Rashi thinks that this word over here, vehemarta, means somehow to glorify and to make something of significance. And therefore this dual response and action and response, we glorify God and God glorifies us, and that's part of this drama that takes place by Har Sinai. Good. And again, by Arvot Moav. Source number 15 is the Datz Kain Mibalei Tosfot. I picked him, but we could have picked a whole bunch of the other of the Balei Tosfot. They all go down the same path. And they're going to all give multiple interpretations for this. And at this point, we're going to try to squeeze a little bit, as much as we can, into the time that we have left. But he's going to tell you that, and I'm going to, again, do this quickly. One is he says that some say that it means omrim. It was a declaration. Okay, let's start off. Sorry, I skipped a little bit. Let's look at 15. One is, it means chativa, but we don't know what chativa means. But that already we saw was in the Targum Onkelos. We're going to come back to that. Shatem omrim Shema Yisrael. It's a declaration. Declaration. Omrim. Amarta. You declare. You declare God is one. And what does God declare? God declares that you're an Am Skula. Good. Pay attention. Atem omrim Shema Yisrael. So notice that that's a Canaan. By the way, just like the Balaturim did, they both got to Shema Yisrael. Now there's a reason for this. A couple more seconds. Davar Acher, some say that it's Lashon Tzmura, it means to exchange. That we exchanged all the other false gods and accepted one true monotheistic God. And God exchanged all other nations only for us. And the other he quotes Rosh Amir, Gvaot, something which is high up. And at the very end he writes, Shetagli Nishalmi Ata Amarta Malchut Shekem Beloshan Aravi Korin Lemelech Emir. What's an Emir? He's talking Arabic now. What's in a prince or a king? So he's saying Hemarta means that you coronate God, and God coronates you. By the way, that itself should be really interesting. All the Baalei Tosfot go in that same direction, and including getting to much more modern commentaries, they love this etymology over here. But again, Rashi is saying, oh, this is an unusual word. It's an unusual word in Hebrew, but it is a word that we're familiar with from other Semitic languages, and it means emir, vehemarta, that you are declaring God as king. I'm going to say this again. How do you declare God as king? Well, one of the ways we do it is when we say Shema. That's Malchiot. So keep all of that in mind, and then Ibn Ezra quotes the Rav Yehuda Levi, same kind of direction, Rav Tamir, Ramban. And now we can finally read the Gemara in source 18. Now, if you're going to declare God as king, what do you need to do? Well, you need to coronate. What else does a king need? Say it. What does a king need? A king needs subjects, palace. How do you coronate? You put the crown. Here's a man who knows about kings. You coronate. You put the crown on the head. Keep that in mind, because without it, you can't understand the Gemara. Source 18. Amar Rabbi Abban bar Rav Ida Amar Rav Yitzchak. Minayin shekadosh baruch hu maniach tefillin. How do you know that God puts on tefillin? Now, this by itself was inexplicable, except I'm explaining this to you, because you should have seen this coming already. Shenemar nishba Hashem b'yimino v'zoro uzo b'yimino zu TORAH. Shenemar b'yimino eish dato u'v'zoro uzo elu tefillin. Shenemar Hashem oz lamoitein u'minayin shetefillin oz heim liYisrael dichtivru kol ha'aretz ki Hashem nikra alecha, and so on. Rabbi Lezer Gadol says in a Braita, elu tefillin shebarosh. Omer le Rav Nachman Yitzchak lebchir ber avin hainu tefillin demorei alma maktivbo. What exactly does it say in God's tefillin? By the way, keep in mind now, what does it say in our tefillin? Because now you just got back to the Shema again. What does it say in God's tefillin? Amr le umi ka'amcha Yisrael goy echad ba'aretz. Now, the word aretz over here I think is quite important. I think all of this as a comment to what now you can say, but what does that have to do with our psukim? Can I read a little bit more? That's what it says in God's tefillin. And does God really praise Israel? Yes, tichtiv et Hashem he'emarta hayom. You coronated God today, v'Hashem he'mircha hayom, and God coronated you today. By the way, what does the Midrash say that God did by Har Sinai when we coronated God at Sinai? What is that? He put crowns on their heads. Now, again, you may never have connected those crowns on the heads with anything else, but keep on going over here. Which was why the word emir, right? Emarta, what the Targum Onkelos translated chativa echad. You unified me as one in the world. You made me as one in the world, as it says, Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Again, why quote this verse of all verses? Because that's what it says in the Shema. Over here you had the hint towards the Shema. So now you realize a whole bunch of the commentaries had this Gemara either open in front of them as they're explaining our psukim, because the Gemara quoted our psukim, and they saw this as the larger issue which is taking place. Again, this coronation which is taking place, man coronating God and that's the emir. That's the emir, and that's really interesting that we all become princes, which again shouldn't be surprising, right? I am going to make you a nation of princes. I'm going to make you a nation of priests. I'm going to make you a nation which is very significant, and therefore putting these crowns on the head, as it were. And again, by Mincha we say, but again, this aretz part of it, the land part of it, can't really be taken out of this entire equation. So now we have 2 minutes left. There's a long gra in source 20 and a short gra in source 21, and they both will tell you surprising things. The acceptance of mitzvot, as we're about to enter the land of Israel, is because the land of Israel is a whole different issue, which means it gets real over here. He matter of fact says, and you're not going to believe me, so you'll have to read it inside later. Maybe we'll look at the shorter one. He says that kol dar b'chutz la'aretz dome k'mi she'ein lo Eloka. Accepting God means living in Israel. I'm sorry for anybody who may hear this, and I apologize. And he goes so far to say is, Lefichach afilu goyim hadarim be'eretz Yisrael tzrichim lekayim kol mitzvot. Even non-Jews, if you live in Israel, you have to keep mitzvot. He says it. By the way, he said in both of these sections. I'll leave this for the rest of you to contemplate, to try to figure out, to deal with. And we're going to skip a whole bunch and get maybe much more towards a conclusion for today. This, okay, if anybody has a bar mitzvah they need to speak by, pay attention to the tefillin issue. At the very end, by source 31, I pointed out what are the 4 Parshat of tefillin. Kadesh li kol b'chor, v'yakivi avacha, right, when you're going to enter into the land. So realize, Parshat ki Tavo, v'heveti, v'yakiviacha, entering into the land, are connected to them. The last 2 Parshat, of course, are Shema and V'yam Shemoah, which means there is this land basis to it. Now, some of the sources that I skipped are ones which Rashi quotes, the Ramban quotes, Ibn Ezra quotes, that doing mitzvot in Chutz La'aretz, what they're quoting is a midrash that says it's practiced when we come back to the land of Israel.